Today's topic is about independent contractors, and we're going to add the information contained in this presentation to our entrepreneur's knowledge base. To get started, LegalDictionary.com defines an independent contractor as a person who contracts to do work for another person, according to his or her own processes and methods. The contractor is not subject to another's control except for what is specified in a mutually binding agreement for a specific job. For example, say we needed our living room painted. I would hire an independent contractor or a painter to come into my home and paint my living room. I would not tell that painter how to do his job, which brushes to buy, which ladders to use, what clothes to wear, that kind of thing. I would not be able to control those aspects of the agreement. However, I would be able to agree upon how much I would expect to pay the painter and also the amount of time perhaps that it would require to get the job done. Okay, so why choose an independent contractor? Here's some examples of what an independent contractor might be. Okay, it could be a painter, as we've said. It could be a chef that's hired to cater a special event, say a wedding reception for the family or a picnic barbecue. Could be a contractor to come in and fix a door that's fallen off its hinges in your home. Could be a plumber, say the kitchen sink has sprung a leak and that needs to be fixed. Could also be a seamstress who needs to sew a wedding dress for your daughter. Could be a musician who's coming in to play put on a special concert for your business Christmas party. Okay, so an independent contractor contracts with another entity, could be a person or a business, to do a particular type of work. This working relationship is a flexible one that provides benefits to both the worker and the entity. The independent contractor is not an employee of the entity that hires him. The independent contractor provides the services requested, is paid for the services, and then the relationship is finished. Okay, so the reason why this is a great relationship and why it's so flexible is because the person that wants to hire a contractor gets to decide when to hire that contractor based on, say, the budget that he's got to work with or the time frame he's got to work with. And then he can also pick and choose who he wants to come in and do the work. On the flip side to that, the independent contractor can have many clients that he's working for all at the same time, and he can pick and choose which jobs that he's going to go to first, second, and third. He can prioritize them. He can charge whatever rates he decides are market worthy and make a decent living at that. And he's his own boss. He doesn't have to work for a larger company. So it's a great way to do business. Okay, so how do you hire an independent contractor? Well, first you determine what type of work needs to be done, say painting, landscaping, or home repair, etc. Then it's your job to recruit an independent contractor to perform those duties for you. All right, so you've got to go on the internet. You've got to look up the name of, say, a painter to come in to paint the living room. You've got to find out if they're local, if they are reputable, if they are insured, that kind of thing. So it's your job to recruit the contractor to come into an agreement with you. Then lastly, you need to enter into an agreement, a written agreement about the work to be completed and the cost that will be involved. This agreement is commonly called an independent contractor agreement, and it is all the details are filled in there, and then it's signed by both parties. It's very important to have written agreement signed by both parties. That way you are better able to protect yourself since everything's in writing. Sometimes when oral information is shared, it can be misunderstood and misrepresented, and then you could be left with an incomplete job or a job that wasn't done correctly and no way to recover your losses. So let's talk about some of the points that are included in the independent contractor agreement. First, of course, we have both the parties' names that are involved in the agreement need to be clearly labeled and included. There's also going to be a section about the duties, the terms and compensation that will be exchanged. Duties would be the type of work that's being done, the length of time that it's typically going to take to perform that duty, and then the amount of money that it's going to cost to have that duty performed. There'll be a section about expenses, just an understanding that the expenses related to the event or the service are being shared with the client, so they're fully aware of the cost. The client could also request written reports, say updates on the status of the project and if we're staying on budget or not, and if there's an extension needed in the time it's going to take to complete the project. And then there's going to be some other sections that talk about inventions, things that are discovered while the service is being performed. Something is discovered that wasn't known before, and how that invention is the sole property of the client and does not belong to the independent contractor. There's going to be a confidentiality clause, conflicts of interest clause, right to injunction. There'll be a merger clause that talks about how if, say, a bank was to hire a painter to come in and paint the inside of the lobby, and then that bank is bought out by another bank and merges with that bank, there's going to need to be an understanding about what happens with the agreement and the work that's being done during times of merge. There's a termination clause, who gets to terminate the agreement and under what circumstances. There'll be a note about insurance requirements, liability, that kind of thing, workers' comp. Some notices will be included, and then other clauses. And basically, the form wraps up with signatures on the last page, as well as a recap of the duties, terms, and compensations held in what's called a Schedule A. Okay, so the difference between an employee and an independent contractor. Here I've got independent contractor would operate under a business name, would have his or her own employees, would maintain a separate business checking account, would advertise his business's services, would invoice for the work completed, would have his own tools and sets his own hours, would be responsible for the entire amount of taxes that are paid to the IRS. Typically, those are done quarterly. In comparison, an employee performs duties as dictated or controlled by others. His employer is given training for the work to be done. The employee works for only one employer. The employee shares cost of Social Security and Medicare with his or her employer and pays out for those costs with the automatic withdrawal from his paycheck. The employee can be hired and fired by the employer. So let's take a look at that. Say you hired Joe's Painting Company. Okay, Joe's Painting Company has been advertising on the internet, and that's how you found him. Was you did a Google search and found Joe's Painting Company was located right down the road from your business that you need painted. Okay, so you enter into an agreement with Joe's Painting Company to come in and paint your lobby of your bank. The employees who work for the independent contractor cannot be hired or fired by you. They can only be hired or fired by Joe, who owns the painting company. However, if you are an employee of the bank and you steal money from the bank, you can absolutely be fired by the employer or the president of the bank. The independent contractor, like I said before, can work for many different clients. He can have a long list of people that he works for, whereas an employee can only work for one person at a time. Okay, so those are some examples. All right, and taking it one step further, these are some other factors that can determine if the relationship is an employee to employer or an independent contractor. Whether the worker is engaged in a distinct occupation or business, whether the employer performs any required supervision, how much skill the work requires, who supplies the tools and equipment necessary for the work, the length of time needed to perform the job, whether payment is based on time or by the job, whether the work is part of the regular business of the employer, and whether the parties believe they are an employer or an employee. Okay, so those are ways that you can also determine if you've got an employee-employer relationship or an independent contractor to client relationship. More to follow.